Hello and welcome to Sammy's Bookshelf. I'm Sammy and today I'm going to be doing a full spoilery review and discussion of House of Sky and Breath by Sarah J. Maas. Sequel to House of Earth and Blood, which is part of the Crescent City series. If you have not read this series yet, I highly recommend it. It's fantastic. As for my non-spoilery thoughts, I loved this book. I didn't love it quite as much as the first book. Just the third act in the first book was just so amazing. Like, this third act didn't quite top it, but that's just me being picky. This book is amazing and I loved seeing all these characters again and watching their relationship strengthen and develop. It was just so great. But it's kind of hard to talk more non-spoilery about this book when it's a sequel, so if you have not read this series or you have not finished reading this book yet, please leave because I will be going into full spoilers starting right now. Okay, so for this discussion, I'm going to try my best to keep all my thoughts in some kind of order. It's really hard for me to not just go right to the end and start talking about that, but I'm going to try and go in some kind of chronological order so we don't miss any important things that we need to discuss. So let's start off with the prologue. So in the prologue, we meet a new character named Sophie Renast. And when we meet her, she is saving her brother from a death camp, which we find out he's been put in because her parents were killed for being rebels. In this book, and especially in this prologue, is really the first time we get really in-depth detail about the rebels. It's mentioned quite a bit in the first book, and obviously we meet Briggs, who is part of the human rebellion, and obviously we know about the rebellion that Hunt was in with Shaha, but this is the first time we get real in-depth information about the rebellion in present day and what's been happening. So we learn about this rebel organization named Orpheon. Sorry if I pronounce any of the words wrong. I'm just going to pronounce them like how I pronounced it when I read it, but there's a very likely chance I'm going to pronounce everything wrong. But we meet Orpheon, which is the main rebel group, the one that kind of holds the most threat to the asteroid. And we find out that Sophie has been working for them for a couple of years because she needs them to get her brother out of this death camp. So she's been doing these missions for them for years in exchange for information about her brother, which this piece of information, the fact that Sophie was kind of blackmailed into doing things to get information for her brother, so the first kind of sign that Orpheon is kind of a dodgy organization. But on these missions, we found out that Sophie has discovered this really important intel, and she's the only person that knows it, but this intel could potentially be the key to destroying the asteroid. But Sophie is keeping it to herself. She's using it as leverage to make sure that Orpheon actually helps her and does what was promised. We also meet a character named Agent Silverbow, and it is inferred that he's in love with Sophie. But the big piece of info we find out in the prologue that becomes really important in the rest of this book is that Sophie is a Thunderbird, and a Thunderbird is this really powerful Vanir who was all killed off by the asteroid because they were so powerful that they posed a threat to the asteroid's rule. Sophie is part Thunderbird, and she has this ability to absorb energy and first light and then harness that and use that as her power, which, as we see in the prologue, she's super powerful. And we get told that her brother Emile is also part Thunderbird as well, so he also possesses these powers. And we see when we meet Pippa Spestos, who is a high-ranking commander of Orpheon, and she's a fanatic. She really wants Emile and Sophie so that she can use them as leverage in the rebellion against the asteroid. We then meet another new character named the Hind. When I first read this, I thought the Hind was going to be a new main antagonist, kind of taking over from Micah in the first book, but we hear that she is just super ruthless. She tortures her victims. She just doesn't seem like a lovely lady, but Sophie gets captured by the Hind as she's trying to escape with Emile and Agent Silverbow, and pretty much at the end the Hind kills her, therefore destroying that piece of intel that could potentially destroy the asteroid. It dies with Sophie, when Sophie died, it was like a less traumatic version, I feel like, of Danika and the wolves dying. Like Sophie, we see this character who's all this potential to be super cool and be super helpful to our crew, and by the end of the prologue, she's dead. The whole romance between Silver and Sophie, which is all just like gone because Sophie again is dead. So I got like Danika dying vibes, but just like not as intense and traumatic. So that was the prologue, and the prologue is really important because it sets everything up for the rest of the book. So finally we get to chapter 1 and we finally see Bryce and Hunt. Now there was a lot of discussion whether Bryce and Hunt were actually going to be endgame, because we all know that Sarah J Maas likes to swoop in with other love interests. Sarah J Maas's protagonists often do not end up with the first person that they fall in love with, their first love interest, and a lot of people were thinking that Adis was going to be Bryce's other love interest. But honestly, I never really believed that. I love Bryce and Hunt as a couple, and I just didn't want to believe that anybody else could swoop in. I was pretty certain they were going to be endgame, and I was right. Immediately when I first started reading the first couple chapters, Bryce and Hunt are talking about how they complement each other so well. It was just pretty obvious to me that that was Sarah J Maas being like, don't worry, they're endgame, there's not going to be anybody else. And I just couldn't see Sarah J Maas swooping in with a second love interest after there was so much development between Bryce and Hunt in the first book, and really like a slow build, slow burn development of their romance. Because if we look at Sarah J Maas's other books, for example, if we look at A Court of Thorns and Roses compared to A Court of Mist and Fury, like this is the Tamlin and Feyre's love story, and this is Feyre and Rhys's love story. There's a big difference in the thickness of these books. Same with Throne of Glass and Crown of Midnight compared to Heir of Fire. Sarah J Maas has a tendency to have longer books when she first introduces the love interest, because she takes longer to flesh them out and grow their relationship. House of Earth and Blood was a pretty big book, so I just looking at all that, I just knew Bryce and Hunt were going to be endgame, even though a lot of people didn't think that that was going to be the case. But I was right, so... And technically Sarah J Maas kind of did stick to her pattern, because Hunt wasn't Bryce's first love interest. Bryce's first love interest was technically Connor, rest in peace, and also kind of Ithan a little bit. But I was right, Hunt and Bryce are endgame 100%, because at the end of this book we find out they're mates, they're endgame, it's all good. But I just loved Bryce and Hunt in this book. I loved all their dialogue together. I love that they have such fun and witty banter together, and I just love all the interactions. Like every time Bryce and Hunt like weren't interacting, I was like, when are we gonna see Bryce and Hunt dialogue again? Because it was great. Something that I was really excited going into this book was discovering what Bryce's power was gonna be, because obviously at the end of the last book she does the drop and she becomes super powerful, plus we find out she's a starborn fae. So I was really interested to see what her power was gonna be, because we didn't really get to see it at the end of House of Earth and Blood because she made the drop right at the end of the book. I was also excited to see how powerful Hunt was going to be, because in all of the first book he has that crown of thorns on his head that makes him not as powerful. But like we see at the end of the first book, he literally rips off Sanjul's head, and so I was very excited to see just how powerful Hunt really is. So it was really exciting to learn that Bryce and Hunt's powers go together, which also makes sense because they're mates, and if we go on like the Athalar theory of what mates are, they're perfect equal, so it makes sense that their powers would complement each other. And we find out when we go to the Bone Quarter that Bryce has the ability to absorb energy and then harness that and use that to help her become more powerful, kind of similar to Sophie and her Thunderbird powers. And we find out that Hunt's lightning can be that energy. Bryce can absorb Hunt's power, and it like makes her like double powerful. She has more like strength to like do things. For example, like teleporting. I feel like this was like the first real hint in this book about the crossover, because we find out that Cormac can teleport, and the way that he described teleporting was just exactly like how Winnowing is described in Athalar. He describes it as folding a piece of paper and just like stepping across. So that made me really excited, but like at that point I knew there was a lot of references to the Athalar world in the first book. At this point I just wasn't really believing it could really happen. Like, I just thought it was just like a fun Easter egg. I was obviously very wrong. The thing that was really confusing me throughout the whole book was the demon thing, and I couldn't tell whether it was meant to be confusing or if I was just stupid, because we talk to Adis at the beginning of the book and he talks about the Starborn Fade, everything that happened with them, and then he talks about how Hel's armies are waiting for Bryce, like they're at her disposal. And we know from the first book that the idea that Hel wants to come in through the southern and the northern rifts and take over Midgard are false. The Princes of Hel have no desire to take over Midgard. And then we meet Apollyon, who is another prince of Hel, and he seems a lot more sinister, and he talks about how he wants to make sure that Bryce and Hunt are super powerful and know how to use their powers because he wants a worthy opponent. So then it gets really confusing because it's like, is Hel on our side or not? That's pretty much the big question with the Princes of Hel in this book, is are they on our side or not? Because it seems like Adis is on our side, but his brothers, the other princes of the pit, seem very sinister and like they're not on our side. I was thinking, was Adis like a rogue prince of Hel and he was helping Bryce, but the other princes of Hel weren't on board with that? Like, that's what I was thinking, but I was like very confused about this whole plot line throughout the book, but it ended up making sense in the end, which I'll talk about that more when we actually get to talking about the end. So since we're talking about teleporting, let's talk about Cormac next. So Cormac is another character that we meet in this book, and he shows up in like the second chapter, introducing himself as Bryce's fiance, which Bryce's father, the Autumn King, has set up. To be honest, when he first came, I was like, oh my god, is this like the second love interest? But then I scrapped that from my mind. I was like, no. And we kind of like don't like Cormac at first. He's like expressionless, has no emotion. But then we discover that he is actually Agent Silverbow from the prologue. Plot twist, I did not see that one coming. I really grew to really like Cormac's character throughout this book. I loved his interactions with the other people of our crew, and I just really grew to like his character very naturally and gradually throughout the book. And like, I only really realized how much I liked Cormac when we find out once and for all that Sophie is truly dead, because we know from Tharion that he found her manacles along the ocean and they were unclasped, and so there was a chance that Sophie was alive, and we know from the prologue and from conversations throughout that Cormac is in love with Sophie. And I just really felt so bad for him when Sophie was dead and they go and visit her dead body. That's when I really realized how much I liked Cormac's character, because I wanted Sophie to be alive for him. I also felt bad for him when Bryce and Hunt declared in front of Celestina and Ephraim that they were mates and didn't tell Cormac that they were going to do that. The fake engagement was benefiting both of them, and I just didn't understand why Bryce and Hunt just couldn't tell Cormac, because they thought of this plan 2 weeks ahead of that party. Obviously we know Cormac can keep a secret, like he's a rebel spy, and so I felt really bad for Cormac. I didn't understand why Bryce and Hunt just couldn't tell him. Cormac does, however, die in this book. I was really sad when he died, but I wasn't surprised. After Sophie died, he kind of had that vibe that like he was gonna sacrifice himself, because if Sophie's not alive, kind of had that vibe that he didn't want to be alive anymore. But he died in a heroic way. He blows up that building where they were making I forget the name of them, but the robot thingies that the Astri were going to use in the rebellion, and he kills Pip Asbestos with him. Could Cormac potentially be alive? We didn't really see like a dead body, we just know that the building blew up. Could Cormac still be alive? It is a possibility. He couldn't have teleported out because he was shot by one of those Gaussian bullets, but the Astri were there. He could be alive and the Astri took him. If that's the case, then I would assume he'd be reunited with Hunt and Ruhn and Baxian in third book, because they're all captured in the Eternal City right now, and if the Astri captured Cormac, I assume that's where they would take him. But for Cormac's sake and the potential torture he would go through, hopefully he is dead. I don't know, I don't really think he's alive. I'm 80% sure that he's dead, but like there is a slight possibility. It does make me sad though. I would have enjoyed seeing him in following books. Okay, I'm kind of just starting to go from like character to character now, so let's talk about Ruhn next. So Cormac recruits Ruhn into the rebellion, kind of. We know that Sophie was in contact with a rebel spy named Agent Daybright, and because Sophie is now dead dead. They have no one else to contact that agent, and they really need contact because Agent Daybright has direct access to the Astery and can tell the rebels about the Astery's next moves. So we know that she's super high ranking to be able to have direct access to the Astery, and Ruhn is potentially the only person that can contact her because of his mind talking telepathy thing that he has going on. And he does manage to communicate with her, and then we have a romance between Ruhn and Day, which I really enjoyed seeing their romance. Now, who did you think Day was going to be? Because there's this whole mystery about who Day actually is. I myself had 5 guesses on who I thought Day was going to be. My first guess was that it was going to be Hypaxia. Actually, I think her name is actually pronounced Hypatia, but I thought it was going to be Hypatia because from the first book, I thought Hypatia was going to be Ruhn's main love interest, and they are engaged, so it would kind of be like a nice happy ending if Hypatia was Day. But that one was kind of quickly debunked because we know that Day is high ranking and she has direct access to the Astery, and it didn't really make sense that Hypatia would have direct contact to the Astery, especially because she helped Hunt kill Sandriel. That just didn't really make sense. The only really thing that I had that was evidence that it could be Hypatia was that she told that story about the witch, which kind of is evidence for somebody else, but that was the only thing that I had, was that she was telling the story about the witch and Hypatia is a witch. But that one for me was debunked pretty much straight away. It was pretty obvious it was not Hypatia. My second guess was Celestina, and I guessed this when we found out that Day had like an abusive boyfriend slash male who like rips her away from Ruhn when they're talking. And that was also around the time we discovered that Celestina was being forcibly mated to Ephraim by the Astery, and I thought that was Ephraim who was the abusive male, yanking her out of the conversations with Ruhn. And it makes sense that she would have direct access to the Astery because she's an archangel and she's the new leader of Crescent City, so that made sense. But then Bryce and Hunt walk in on Hypatia and Celestina hooking up at that party, so then obviously at that point it's very obvious Celestina was not Day. My other 3 guesses were one of the Astery, the Harpy, and the Hind. I thought it was one of the Astery for a bit because it made sense that when Ruhn went to go meet Day at the fountain that they arranged to meet her at that party. We know that the Astery were watching the party through cameras the whole time. It would make sense why Day saw Ruhn but Ruhn didn't see Day if she was watching through a camera the whole time. And it also makes sense why she would know about Bryce and Hunt because she was there watching the whole thing just from the Eternal City, and that she was just lying the whole time that she was going to meet Ruhn at the fountain because she couldn't because she's an Astery. And I thought she just used the Hind and the Harpy being there as a cover-up because she wasn't actually going to be there. That one I debunked pretty quickly after I thought of it because I went back and read the first scene where Ruhn and Cormac talk about Day, and Cormac says that Ophion had debated whether Day could be an Astery because she had such great intel, and so that made me think it wasn't an Astery because I don't think Sarah J. Maas would have said that early on if it was an Astery. So I debunked that. I didn't think that was going to be it. So my other 2 guesses were the Hind and the Harpy. I thought the Harpy potentially, when she didn't recognize Ruhn when he called her Day, was just pretending because she saw the Hind coming. But that didn't really make too much sense. My only other guess was the Hind, and kind of everything made sense with the Hind. She's high ranking, she has direct access to the Astery and intel. She was there at the fountain at the party with them because the Harpy was there. She kept up appearances as the Hind to, you know, keep up the ruse. And it made sense with the abusive boyfriend because we know that the Hind has a toxic relationship with Pollux, who is not a good guy. And also with the Hind, it also made sense with the witch story that I was thinking was evidence for Hypatia because Lydia, the Hind, is Hypatia's half sister, and so she is half witch, so it all made sense. So that was my final guess for who Day was going to be. I didn't have any other guesses, and I was right. It was the Hind. When we discovered it was the Hind, my final guess was right. I felt like the smartest woman in the world. Is it likely that a lot of other people also figured it out, probably even before I did? Yes. Don't rain on my parade. Like, I was just so proud that I figured that out. The mystery see the answer to the mystery before the characters do. The only thing that was confusing about the Hind being Day is that if the Hind is Day and a rebel, why kill Sophie? But I assumed that that was going to be explained, like there's going to be some kind of excuse, like maybe that wasn't really the Hind. I was like, maybe that wasn't the Hind, maybe that was like a shapeshifter, like Lysandra in Throne of Glass. It just ended up being that the Hind pushed her into the ocean but was hoping that those mermaids who were in those big ocean ship things would come and rescue her before she drowned, but they didn't get there in time. I wonder if we'll meet the Ocean Queen in the next book because she's got those big submarine things. It's definitely going to come into play in the next books. So the way that we find out that the Hind is Day is that Ruhn thinks Day has been captured by the Astery and is in the dungeons in the Eternal City. So he goes to rescue her, but Ruhn, Hunt and Bryce get captured and they're in the dungeons, and the Hind comes and saves them from the Harpy. She kills the Harpy and we find out she's Day. I'm also just really excited about the future of Ruhn, and I guess we should call her Lydia now because that's her actual name. I'm really excited to see where this romance is going to go in the next book between Ruhn and Lydia, because now there's some tension now that Ruhn knows that she's the Hind, and I think it's going to be really interesting and really fun to see them have to, or really to see Ruhn have to learn to trust her again. I just know that Sarah J Maas is going to do such a good job with that storyline, so I'm very excited about it. And I'm also guessing that Lydia is going to help Ruhn, Hunt and Baxian escape. I don't know how she would because she has to keep up appearances. She has to have something to do with keeping them safe, hopefully, in the Eternal City. Okay, let's move on to another character. But let's talk about Ithan next. So we got to learn so much more about Ithan in this book. Throughout all the first book, Ithan and Bryce had beef, or really just Ithan had beef with Bryce, and so we didn't really get to learn too much about Ithan, but we get to learn so much more about Ithan in this book. And I love just seeing Bryce and Ithan mend their friendship, and I love just seeing Ithan become part of our crew. He just fit in so seamlessly. I loved his interactions with Ruhn and Tristan and Declan when he moves in. It's just, oh, so great. I also forgot to mention that Connor has been exiled from his pack because he helped Bryce in the big battle at the end of the last book to protect the humans. And also Connor defended Bryce against Sabine in a newspaper article, which Sabine was not happy about. I laughed out loud in that scene where Ithan finds Danika's sword in Bryce's room and he's playing with it and pretending to fight imaginary enemies, and he hops up onto the coffee table and then Bryce comes home and is like, what the hell? And then the coffee table breaks. Just A+ comedy. And then we also find out in this book that Ithan had a thing for Bryce, like a pretty intense thing. Like he had a huge crush on Bryce. We don't really explore that too much. We know that when Ithan first saw Bryce, he was like starstruck and was like super in love with her, and then he found out that she was the girl that Connor was in love with and he couldn't do anything, and then he kind of has this guilt that when Connor died, he kind of had that thought that it was easier now to be with Bryce. At the end, Ithan just kind of explains that, you know, he still has a bit of a thing for her, but he respects that she's with Hunt now. He wants to be her friend. It was kind of a nice little bow on that storyline to mending Bryce and Ethan's relationship. But then I also did think for a second there's another love interest, because like even though I was pretty certain that Bryce and Hunt were endgame, I was still wary. So I was for a second thinking like, is this the other love interest? But it wasn't. But I just really enjoyed Bryce and Ethan's relationship through this book and them mending their friendship. It was really nice to see. And I'm also just excited for Ethan's storyline. We set up a really interesting storyline for him in this book of him trying to overthrow Sabine, which we assume he's going to try and do with the wolf mystic. Let's talk about this now. So pretty much when Bryce and Hunt go to the Bone Quarter, we find out that everything we thought we knew about death in this world is all false. We were told that they go across on this boat and that if their soul is worthy, they get to go onto the Bone Quarter and their soul gets to rest in the Bone Quarter for eternity in peace. We find out that after a couple hundred years of their souls being in the Bone Quarter, they get filtered back through the gate and their soul gets turned into Secondlight, which we then find out is then given to the Astery to consume. So that's not like a great thing to happen to your soul, and so Ithan is some really trouble throughout this whole book about Connor and if he's okay and if the pack of wolves are okay. And so he kind of goes on this mission to try and contact Connor's soul to make sure that he's okay and that he has not yet been turned into Secondlight. So we go to the Mystics, who are these things in these like little water bowls, and they can talk to demons in their mind and go into different realms. The Mystics are very mistreated. Connor finds out that one of the Mystics is a wolf, and not just a wolf, but she's an alpha wolf. And Ithan is not happy about this. She was put in there purposefully because she could potentially overthrow Sabine and take Sabine's role in the wolf pack. She has claim to Sabine's role as the leader of the wolves because she is related to Sabine. She's a Fedia. I know that at the end that Ithan rescues this Mystic, and so I can only assume that a big part of Ethan's plot is going to be overthrowing Sabine, which is going to be very interesting. And it also seems like this Mystic is going to be a potential love interest for Ithan. Sometimes I think people are going to be love interests, and then Sarah J. Maas is like, just kidding. I'm just excited for all the romance. Ethan's trying to contact Connor, but we're not successful. We're trying to get Hypatia to contact Connor, but the Under King crashed the party. I'm really excited about the idea of potentially talking to Connor in the next book. I think there could be a really great heartwarming conversation between not just Ithan and Connor, but Bryce and Connor. I feel like Bryce for a long time has felt really guilty about what happened between her and Connor before he died. I think them having a conversation could be a nice closure to their relationship. I love how in the last chapter, Connor says that Tharion and Tristan and Ruhn and Declan are his new pack, because obviously at the start of the book he was exiled from his pack, but like they're his pack now. And I'm so excited to see more interactions between all those characters, because obviously I would assume they're going to be working to try and rescue Ruhn and Hunt. Okay, on to the next character. So let's talk about Tharion. So Tharion is one of the people who's trying to find Emile, because the River Queen wants Emile, we presume, because she wants to take over all the bodies of water and not just be the River Queen anymore, and Emile's power would be very helpful to do that. And so she has forced Tharion to try and find him, and we know that Tharion doesn't really have a choice because he slept with the River Queen's daughter and now they're engaged, and if he doesn't do what the River Queen says, or if he upsets the River Queen's daughter in any way, that pretty much River Queen is gonna force him to stay under the water forever, and Tharion really does not want that to happen. I really love how Tharion is fleshed out more in this book. Similar to Ithan, we see Tharion in the first book, but we don't really get to flesh him out much. That's what happens in this book. We see so much more of Tharion, and it's so great. He's a great character, and I also love his interactions with Ithan and Ruhn and Declan and Tristan. We have a bromance going on with all those people. They're all living together right now. It's just like a whole heap of fun. So pretty much at the end, after he discovers that he's not going to be able to capture Emile because Emile has no power in the first place, and he's gone to Bryce's parents to live with them. Bryce's parents have adopted him. He is kind of in a sticky situation, and eventually he just decides to break things off with the River Queen's daughter, but that means that he's gonna have to stay underwater with the River Queen forever. And so to not have this happen, he makes a deal with the Viper Queen to fight in her fighting ring thing, and so he's like enslaved to her right now. What do you think is gonna happen with this plotline? Because obviously we have to get Tharion out of this situation. He can't just be enslaved to the Viper Queen for the rest of his life. Is the River Queen gonna try and do something to get him back? What's gonna happen? I have no idea. I have no theories about this at all. Like, I just don't know what's gonna happen to Tharion. I just had a thought while I was editing this that the Ocean Queen is probably going to play a part in saving Tharion from being enslaved to the Viper Queen for the rest of his life. I've kind of just assumed from those really cool submarines that we saw that the Ocean Queen is a pretty cool lady, at least hopefully better than the River Queen and hopefully less dodgy. So maybe Tharion could be saved by her, and maybe Tharion could pay her back by helping her in some way. I don't know, something like that seems kind of plausible to me. Let me know what you think is your theories for this, because I don't know. I'm just very worried about Tharion and his future. I want him to be okay. I also wonder if Tharion is going to get a love interest. I can only assume that he is, because I feel like Sarah J. Maas likes to have all her characters in a romantic pairing, so at the end everyone is happy and in love and great. So I'm interested to see a potential romance between Tharion and somebody else. I was thinking just now Ariadne the dragon, but I'm pretty sure Tristan and Ariadne are gonna have a romance. Something I did not see coming was the reveal that Baxian and Danika were mates. So pretty much Hunt knows Baxian from working under Sandriel, and we know that he did a lot of very cruel, not great things. He's like kind of a partner to Pollux, and throughout this whole thing Baxian is helping them and not ratting them out to Celestina or anyone about their very illegal activities. And we're kind of wondering why he's doing this, because he's been described so horribly by Hunt about what a horrible, ruthless person he is. And he says towards the end that he is a rebel sympathizer. We feel like there's something more, and the something more is that he was mates with Danika. Honestly, I feel so bad for Bryce every time we discover something new about Danika that Bryce didn't know, including her conversations with Sophie and her knowing about Sophie and this intel this whole time. Like, I just feel so bad because Bryce told Danika everything and Danika told Bryce nothing. Honestly, I thought all the secrets about Danika were out in the first book, but there just keeps being more stuff that Danika did that Bryce just did not know about. And so I wonder if there's going to be even more in the third book. I don't know. So I guess also we should talk about Emile. I probably should have talked about him earlier on, but he's a big plot point in this book. So Emile is being hunted by all these different people. He's being hunted by Pippa Spestos. He wants to use him for his power in the rebellion. He's being hunted by the River Queen. He's being hunted by Cormac. Everyone's trying to find Emile. And then Bryce is also just hunting for Emile out of the kindness of her own heart, because she doesn't want any of these people to just use him for his power. And we find out at the end that Emile never even had any of the Thunderbird power, because Sophie just insinuated that he did to keep him safe, because she knew that if people thought Emile had this great power, they wouldn't hurt him. But Bryce finds him, and I really love that now Emile is Bryce's stepbrother and that he's gonna go live with Bryce's parents. I just thought that was so nice, but also a tad worrying, because Bryce is in pretty hot water with the Astrid right now, and so if the Astrid try and go for her parents, they're gonna find Emile. Although obviously he has fake documents now, so they wouldn't know he's Emile necessarily. But I would assume that Declan and Tristan would put them into hiding because they know that Bryce and Hunt and Ruhn have been captured. But I was a bit like, is this a good idea? Your parents are kind of like the #1 person the Astrid are gonna go to and kill if your illegal activities are discovered. But he'll probably be fine, hopefully. I think it's time to talk about the ending. So even just thinking about it, my heart rate just like went up. Okay, so let's start from the beginning of the end. We go to the Eternal City to try and figure out what Sophie Renasta knew, because Sophie is now 100% dead and we need to find out what intel she knew that could potentially destroy the Astrid. So Ruhn, Hunt and Bryce go to the Eternal City. Bryce teleports into that room that we saw Sophie go in those security camera footage, and we find out that the Astrid... I didn't explain this well when I was actually filming, so I'm explaining it again via voiceover, but we find out that the Astrid run on First Light. They need First Light to survive, and so they take that from the Vinir that live in Midgard. There's also this like big ball of First Light in the Eternal City. I don't actually know if it's described as a ball of First Light, but that's how I imagine it. But there's this big ball of First Light, and if we destroy that, that kills the Astrid. Pretty much we find out the job is a scam to just give the Astrid First Light for them to consume, and that Second Light that souls turn into when they go through the gate when they die also gets fed to the Astrid. So the Astrid are pretty much just feeding off of Vinir, and they let humans live so that the Vinir felt like they had someone who was below them that they could control, when really the whole time it's the Astrid controlling everything. Then Bryce goes into this other room. I forgot to mention that the second room that Bryce goes into, the door says Dusk, which refers to the emails that Sophie and Danika were exchanging. One of the emails, the subject was Dusk's Truth. And this is where the world expands and where you start to realize a crossover is impending, because Bryce goes into this room and we see all these different worlds that the Astery have either conquered or exterminated or were like kicked out of. They've gone and they've just tried to find good sources of first light for them to consume, and we see some worlds rebelled against them, like Midgard is trying to do, and kick them out of the world, and some were successful, some weren't, and they were exterminated. And we find out because Danika was looking into where the veneer came from. She was looking through her bloodline because she had suspicions that shifters are Fae. So Danika, the wolves are all Fae. They just came from different worlds, where all Fae in different worlds are slightly different, kind of like how the Fae in Athalar are different from the Fae in Throne of Glass. And then the whole demon thing is cleared up because we find out that the Astery, one of the worlds they tried to conquer and tried to get first light from, was Hel. But Hel rose up against them and kicked them out of that world, and then the next world they went to was Midgard, but the demons followed them through and tried to destroy them and pretty much save Midgard from the Astery. So we find out they're our allies. Hel is our ally. It's all good. And then we find out that the reason that all these different supernatural species are all in Crescent City is because of the Astery, because the Astery took a bunch of different creatures that were good sources of first light and lured them in through the northern and southern rift into Midgard, so that they just have this whole world full of good sources of first light that they can feed off of, so they don't need to go into different worlds. So that's like the big mystery of where all these different supernatural creatures came from. And so we find out that Thea, who's an ascendant of Bryce, all the Starborn Fae were from one world, obviously. They were working with Hel to defeat the Astery. And we find out that the scar on Bryce's chest is a beacon from her home world, where the Starborn Fae came from, because obviously Bryce is Starborn. And we know that the Astery now want to go into that world and destroy everything, and also take all the sources of first light, because that world is very magical. And then we also find out that everything that Bryce and the crew has been doing has all been orchestrated by Regulus, who was like a kind of main bad Astery. Even everything that Micah did in the first book was all orchestrated by Regulus. It's this whole thing. Bryce, Ruhn and Hannah all in that like throne room with Regulus, and the Hind has managed to unclasp Bryce's handcuffs, and she runs to this portal that's in that building that's supposed to take her to Hel, and she wants to go to Hel to get Adis's help, but she goes through the portal and she is not where she thought she was gonna end up. She sees this like a river and this big city, and then she gets transported by a winged male to this other building, and we see this lady come through who Bryce mentions is very similar to Fury. Everyone who's read the Akatar series and this all know that we always compare Fury to Amryn. They're very similar characters. And we see these two other people, a boy and a girl, who are also Fae, and they don't understand Bryce, but then Bryce speaks like the ancient Fae language, and Amryn understands, and she says he hasn't heard that language in years and years. And then this other person comes in and Bryce is like, Ruhn, because he looks like Ruhn. And then this sentence is where my soul left my body. The male stepped forward, tucking in his wings. He smiled slightly and said in the old language, in a voice like glorious night, "Hello, Bryce Quinlan. My name is Reset." I died. My heart was racing. I was pacing across the room because like I knew this was a possibility. But like, do we actually believe that Sarah was actually going to do a crossover with another series? I just thought all these things were just like little Easter eggs. But like, it makes sense because we have the Autumn King, and obviously we have an Autumn Court, and Ruhn's powers are so similar to like Rhysand's powers and Asriel's powers. It all makes sense. And so now we know that Bryce, her descendants were from the Akatar world, same with Ruhn and all those Fae. They all originate from the Akatar world, and Bryce is in Valoris. That was the city that she was seeing was Valoris, and the river that she saw was the Sidra. Like, I just can't believe it. I couldn't believe it. Bryce needs help to defeat the Astery, and we know the Astery wants to try and take over the Akatar world because of all the magic that's in there and all the good first light, and they want revenge for what Thea and her Starborn Fae did way back in that first war against Hel, that means Bryce and our crew in Crescent City are gonna work with the Athalar crew. I don't know how I forgot to talk about this, but there's also the idea that we could also do a crossover with the Throne of Glass world. The portals and going into different worlds is very reminiscent of the plot of Throne of Glass. And I feel like if Sarah J. Maas is going to do a crossover, we can't do it half-assed. Like, we have to go fully in and do a crossover of all 3 series. And then, like, I went on to the epilogue, which is in Ithan's point of view, and it's him guarding the wolf mystic and then, like, eventually breaking her out. But, like, literally the whole time, like, I could not concentrate on the epilogue because I was too shocked from a previous chapter. I feel like that should have been the epilogue. The thing with Ithan should have been the last chapter because, like, I could not focus on the epilogue. I didn't care about Ithan. Like, I love Ithan, but I didn't care about him at this point. Like, I was too focused on the fact that Bryce is literally in Belarus and just met Rhysand, Athalar, and Cassian and Azriel. Like, it was just, it was too much. And then also, I'm distraught about Hunt and Ruhn being captured and still in the Eternal City because they're gonna, like, torture them. Hunt gets that thorn thing across his head again that stops him from using his full powers. Like, he just got it off. It's assumed that also Ruhn and Baxian are also going to get that thing across their heads. I think I talked about all the big things. It's really hard because this is a huge book. It's 800 pages, so I don't think I touched on every single little thing. But I think I touched on the big things, and hopefully I explained everything well because this is what I'm going to look back at when the 3rd book comes out and I've forgotten everything. Let's now talk about the theories that we have for the next books. Now, I had a bunch of theories, but over the couple days that it's been since I finished this book, I've debunked them all. Whoops. Let's talk about the theories for Hunt's father. I thought we were going to find out who Hunt's father is in this book. It was hinted at the end of the last book. For a second, I was thinking, could Hunt potentially be the son of Adis and Thea because we know that they were in love? But then that would make Bryce and Hunt related. So then I was like, okay, never mind. People do think that Hunt is Adis's son. I think that could happen. A lot of people think that Hunt's father is potentially one of the Astri because Hunt's original name is Orion, who is a star, and the Astri are described as stars. And also I kind of just assumed at the end of the last book that it's one of the Princes of Hel, which I guess would be Adis. But it could be one of the other Princes of Hel, like could it be Apollyon? My theory for Hunt's father was, could it potentially be someone from the Athalar world? Because that would make sense if he is part Fae from the Athalar world, because number one, it would make sense why Bryce and Hunt are able to have that soul deep mate connection, because usually that only happens between 2 Fae. It's weird to see it between different species, but if Hunt is part Fae, it makes sense why Bryce and Hunt are able to have that soul connection. And then it also makes sense why her scar lights up when she's around Hunt. Regular says that it lights up for people she considers to be her low companions, because we also know that it lights up when it's around people that have the blood of the Starborn Fae, the Athalar Fae. It can't be just like a random guy. It has to be actually someone that we know that is significant. So I don't know, that might not be right, but I think it could be right. Kind of, I don't know. And then also, what we think is going to happen in the Athalar series now. Is Bryce going to be in the next Athalar book? I wonder if the storylines are going to intertwine now. It makes sense if they did, because the way that Sarah J. Maas is releasing these books, she had House of Earth and Blood came out one year, then the next year we had A Quarter Silver Flames, then this year we have House of Sky and Breath, next year we have the 5th Athalar book, then we have the 3rd Crescent City book, and then the 6th Athalar book, and then the last Crescent City book, if it's a quartet and it's gonna follow all like the houses. That would kind of be good, because at least we don't have to wait a full 2 years to find out what happens to Bryce, because we just find out next year when the next Athalar book comes out. But then how is it going to intertwine? Is what's going on in the Athalar world somehow related to what's going on in Crescent City? Is that how we're going to intertwine things? I don't know. Honestly, maybe I'll do a video like a year from now talking about all my theories. I feel like my theories are still too all over the place. Like, I don't know what what's happening.
Also, it's been so long since I read the Throne of Glass series and so long since I read the original Court of Thorns and Roses series, and even A Court of Silver Flames. It's been almost a year since that came out, so the details of that are fading, and so it's hard for me to really figure out how Crescent City and A Court of Thorns and Roses might entwine, because I don't remember the specific details of the plot. I do remember in A Court of Silver Flames they were trying to find the items of the Trove to defeat the human queens. Bryce does have the horn tattooed onto her back. Could that entwine? I don't know. Perhaps I need to do a big reread of every single Sarah Maas book to really figure out all my theories.
But let me know if you have any theories about what's going to happen in the next books. If you have a theory about who Hunt's father is, I'd love to know. Anyway, I think I've talked about everything that I can talk about with this book. Let me know what you think is going to happen in the next books. I loved this book. I don't think I mentioned this at the start of the video, but I gave this a 5 out of 5 stars. But that is the end of my review / discussion / recap of House of Sky and Breath. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I'll see you next time. Bye!